When I pulled into my parents' driveway 2 days earlier than planned, the first thing I saw was a moving truck parked across the garage. The second was a man carrying 2 cardboard boxes down the front steps with my name written across them in black marker. Marlowe, bedroom storage. I killed the engine and sat there for maybe 3 seconds, trying to make the scene make sense. My parents hadn't mentioned moving. My father's truck was still beside the house. My mother's SUV was in its usual spot. Then my younger sister, Tessa, stepped through the front door, holding a roll of packing tape in one hand and the old brass house key I had used since college looped around her wrist. She looked at me, froze, and said, "Mom didn't tell you." That was how I learned my parents had decided to give my sister the house I had been helping pay for almost 7 years. I got out of the car and looked at the boxes again. "Tell me what?" Tessa glanced back toward the house. "I thought you weren't coming back until Friday." I wasn't. The client meeting ended early. A mover came down the steps carrying a floor lamp I recognized from the upstairs bedroom I still used whenever I stayed overnight. "Where is he taking that?" "Storage, I think." Tessa's voice had the careful softness she used when she knew something was going to become an argument, but wanted to pretend she wasn't participating in it. "Mom said we needed to clear the room." "For what?" She hesitated. "For me and No. No was her 6-year-old son. Tessa's divorce had been finalized 4 months earlier, and she had been staying in a 2-bedroom rental across town. I knew money was tight. I knew she hated the apartment. What I did not know was that any of that involved removing my belongings from my parents' house without telling me. I walked past her and into the living room. My mother, Elaine, was standing near the dining table with a folder of paint samples. My father, Grant, sat in his recliner watching the kind of home renovation show he always claimed he wasn't really watching. Mom looked up and smiled too brightly. "Marlowe, you're early, apparently." I set my bag down. "Why are movers taking my things out of the house?" Dad muted the television. Mom gave him a quick look before turning back to me. "We were going to call you tonight." "About what?" She placed the paint samples on the table. "Tessa and No need stability. The rental situation isn't good for them, and with everything she's been through, your father and I decided it makes more sense for her to have the house." I stared at her, not because I didn't understand the words, because I understood them perfectly and still couldn't figure out how she thought they formed a normal sentence. "Have the house how?" "Live here, permanently. With you." Mom's mouth tightened slightly. "Your father and I are looking at something smaller. Maybe a condo. We don't need all this space anymore." I looked at Dad. He rubbed one hand over his knee but didn't meet my eyes. "And the house goes to Tessa?" "Eventually, yes," Mom said. "We want her to have something secure." There it was. Secure. That word had ended a lot of discussions in my family. Tessa needed security. Tessa needed help. Tessa needed time. I was the daughter with the stable career, the decent apartment, the retirement account, the spreadsheet for everything. Nobody ever asked what I needed because I had made the mistake of looking capable. I walked into the kitchen and found a man measuring the wall beside the stove. Cabinet doors were stacked on the table with catalogues beside them. "What's this?" I asked. Tessa followed me in. "Just ideas." The contractor smiled politely. "We're looking at opening this wall and doing new cabinets. Maybe an island if the plumbing works." I turned to Tessa. "You're renovating?" "Eventually. Before Mom and Dad have even moved out." "Marlowe," Mom said behind me, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." I turned around. "I'm trying to understand what exactly you've decided." "We decided Tessa needs the house more than we do." That wasn't my question. Dad stood then, slowly, as if movement itself might count as participation. "Let's all just take a breath." I looked at him. "Who's paying the mortgage next month?" Nobody answered immediately. That silence told me more than anything else had. Mom folded her arms. "The automatic payment is already set up." From my account. For now. For now means what? A few months. Maybe longer. Tessa needs time to get settled. I actually laughed once, but there was nothing funny about it. So you gave her the house, and I keep paying for it. You're not paying for the whole house, Mom said. Your father and I still contribute. That was technically true. It was also the kind of sentence my mother used when she wanted precision to hide the point. For almost 7 years, I had covered a large part of the mortgage. Whenever Dad's income fell short, I had paid property taxes twice when unexpected expenses hit. I had covered most of the new roof, the furnace replacement, plumbing work, and the renovation that made the kitchen look like it did before Tessa started planning to tear it apart again. Every time I hesitated, my parents reminded me that I was helping preserve a family asset. Dad had said more than once, "You're building something here too." I had believed him. I looked at Tessa. "Did you know I was still making payments?" She shifted her weight. "Mom said you help with some expenses." "Some expenses. You have a good job." "Marlowe?" There was no cruelty in her voice that almost made it worse. She said it like my income settled the argument. Mom stepped closer. "Your sister is starting over. She has a child. You live by yourself and you're doing well. I honestly thought you would understand." There it was again, just dressed differently. "You can handle it, so you should." I glanced toward the hallway, where another mover was lifting one of my boxes. "Nobody moves anything else of mine until I figure out exactly what you just gave away." Mom's face changed. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic." I picked up my overnight bag. "I'm going home." "Marlowe?" Dad started. "Not tonight." I drove back to my apartment with both hands tight on the wheel, not crying, not yelling, just replaying one question over and over. How could they give away something I had spent 7 years paying to protect? By the time I got home, anger had turned into something more useful. I went to the closet where I kept old tax documents, loan statements, warranties, and every piece of paperwork I was too organized to throw away. Somewhere near the bottom was a folder from the refinance my parents had done 7 years earlier, when Dad's business had been struggling and the bank wouldn't approve the new loan based on their income alone. I remembered signing documents. I remembered contributing a large lump sum. I remembered Mom joking that the stack of paperwork was thick enough to qualify as a second mortgage by itself. What I didn't remember was exactly what I had signed. I spread everything across my dining table and started reading. Loan disclosures, insurance forms, tax documents. Then I found a copy of the deed. I read the ownership line once, then again. Then I pulled the lamp closer because for one ridiculous second, I thought maybe exhaustion was making me see the wrong thing. 3 names were printed there. Grant Whitaker, Elaine Whitaker, Marlowe Whitaker. My parents hadn't just forgotten how much I had paid toward the house. They had apparently forgotten something much more important. My name was still on it. I read that line until the words stopped feeling like words. Grant Whitaker, Elaine Whitaker, Marlowe Whitaker. I knew I had signed something when my parents refinanced the house 7 years earlier. I knew my income had helped them qualify when Dad's contracting business lost 2 commercial accounts in the same year. I even remembered Mom saying the bank needed my name attached to a few things. What I had never done was think of the house as legally mine in any meaningful way. My parents lived there. They made the day-to-day decisions. I helped because that was what I did. But a deed was not a family promise. It was a record. And according to the record sitting under my dining room lamp at 11:30 that night, my mother had just promised my sister ownership of property that did not belong entirely to her. I didn't call anyone. That was the first useful decision I made. The old version of me would have phoned Dad immediately, demanded an explanation, listened to 3 different versions of why I was overreacting, and probably ended the conversation apologizing for my tone. Instead, I opened my laptop. The next morning, before work, I checked the county property records. My name was there. I checked again using the parcel number from the tax statement. Same result. 3 owners. No later transfer recorded. No document removing me. I requested copies of the current property record and pulled up the mortgage account. I still had access to because part of the payment came from me every month. By 9:30, I had stopped wondering whether I misunderstood the paperwork. I understood it perfectly. The question now was how much of my life I had attached to a house my family was comfortable calling Tessa's. I created a spreadsheet. That probably sounds cold, but spreadsheets were how I calmed down. Numbers didn't sigh when I asked questions. They didn't tell me to be understanding. They didn't remind me that Tessa had been through a difficult divorce. They just sat there and told the truth. I started with the lump sum I had contributed during the refinance. Then I added the monthly mortgage amounts I had covered whenever Dad's income dipped. Property taxes, the roof replacement after a hailstorm, the furnace, half the plumbing repair when a pipe burst behind the upstairs bathroom, the back steps, the electrical panel, materials for the kitchen update 5 years earlier. I had receipts for almost everything because my job had trained me never to throw away paperwork tied to a project. By lunch, the total was a little over $118,000. I stared at the number for a long time, not because it ruined me. It hadn't. I had a decent salary as a commercial interior project manager. I lived below my means. I had savings. That was the problem. My family had looked at the fact that helping them did not destroy me and somehow decided that meant helping them cost me nothing. Simon, Ray's came by that evening with takeout after I texted her. Tell me if I'm losing my mind. Simone and I had worked together for 6 years before she left to start a small renovation company. She was one of the few people who knew how often I changed weekend plans because something at my parents' house needed fixing. She sat at my table, read the deed, looked at the spreadsheet, then looked at me. You've put $118,000 into that property. Over 7 years. And they gave it to Tessa yesterday. They think they did. Simon pushed the takeout container away. What would you tell a client if they paid for half a renovation, and then the building owner handed the finished space to somebody else, but expected the client to keep covering the invoices? That's different. Why? I hated that question because there was no professional answer that didn't make my personal answer sound ridiculous. Because they're my parents. That explains why you helped them. It doesn't explain why your help became invisible. I leaned back in my chair. I don't want to turn this into some giant legal war. Then don't. Simon pointed at the deed. But stop pretending you don't have a position just because using it might make people uncomfortable. The next person I called was Dad. I waited until the following afternoon, when I knew Mom would be at her volunteer committee meeting. He answered on the 3rd ring. Hey, kiddo. His voice was too casual. Do you remember the refinance 7 years ago? Silence. Not long, but long enough. Sure. Do you remember why my name was added to the deed? It was part of the bank paperwork. That's not what I asked. He exhaled slowly. Your income helped us qualify. And I put money into the refinance. Yes. So why did Mom tell Tessa the house was hers? Your mother was trying to give your sister some security. With a house I own. Marlowe. Nobody is trying to take anything from you. Dad, movers were carrying my boxes out while Mom told me the house belonged to Tessa. He went quiet again. I could hear the television somewhere behind him. Finally he said, "We thought you'd understand." That phrase landed harder coming from him because Dad had always been the softer one. Mom pushed. Dad smoothed things over. For years, I had treated his refusal to choose sides as kindness. Sitting in my car outside a job site, I heard it differently. Did you tell Mom my name was still on the deed before she promised the house to Tessa? She knows about the refinance. That wasn't my question. He rubbed his hand over the phone microphone or his face. I heard the faint scrape. Your mother handles most of the house paperwork. There it was. Not an answer. Okay, I said. Okay what? Okay, I know what I needed to know. He started talking faster. Marlowe, don't do anything drastic. Tessa's already had a rough year. I'm not doing anything drastic. And I meant it. I wasn't going to miss a mortgage payment that could hurt my own credit. I wasn't going to cancel insurance or create a crisis just to prove a point. But I was also done paying expenses that existed only because everybody assumed I would. That night, I went through every automatic payment connected to the house. The mortgage stayed. Anything necessary to protect my ownership stayed. The extra utility contribution I had been sending every month stopped. The landscaping service I paid because Dad complained his back hurt stopped. The maintenance account Mom used for small repairs stopped. The money I had promised toward a future bathroom renovation stayed in my savings instead. I sent one short email to Mom and Dad. Until ownership and future financial responsibility for the property are resolved, I am pausing all voluntary household contributions. I will continue meeting obligations necessary to protect my own financial and ownership interests. I read it twice before sending. My hands were shaking slightly, which annoyed me. I had negotiated 6-figure contractor disputes without blinking. Yet telling my own parents I would no longer pay their lawn service felt like stepping off a roof. Mom called less than 10 minutes later. I let it ring once before answering. Why did the utility account say next month's transfer was cancelled? She asked without saying hello. Because I cancelled it. Marlowe, Tessa and No are moving in. Their expenses are already increasing. Then those expenses need to be part of whatever plan you made when you gave her the house. You know she can't cover everything right now. Then you didn't give her a house. You gave her bills you expected me to pay. Her voice sharpened. This is exactly what I was afraid you'd do. You're punishing your sister because you're upset. I looked at the deed lying beside my laptop. No, I'm asking us to resolve who owns what and who pays for what. There is nothing to resolve. For the first time since I had come home to that moving truck, I smiled. Not because anything was funny, because now I knew exactly what the real problem was. My mother believed my money was negotiable. My ownership wasn't even worth discussing. Then we're going to have a very interesting conversation, I said. Because according to the county, my name is still on the deed. She didn't answer for several seconds. And when she finally did, the anger had disappeared from her voice. What deed? That question told me more than any confession could have. Mom called me again that night, then twice the next morning. I didn't answer until after work, because I wanted one full day where nobody could turn a simple fact into a family emergency. When I finally picked up, she didn't mention the deed right away. She started with Tessa. She barely slept, Mom said. She thinks you're going to throw her and No out. I stood in my kitchen with one hand on the counter and closed my eyes for a second. Did I say that? You didn't have to? That's interesting, because what I actually said was that we need to resolve ownership and expenses. You know what this is doing to her. And you know what giving away a house I co-own did to me. Mom sighed like I had introduced an unnecessary complication. Marlowe, you have options. Tessa doesn't. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. I had options because I had spent years building them. I had a stable career because I had worked through weekends, certifications, bad bosses, and more than one project that nearly burned me out. I had savings because I skipped things I wanted and planned carefully. Somehow my family had turned every responsible decision I made into evidence that I could afford to lose more. 2 days later, Mom asked me to come by. She said she wanted to clear the air. I almost said no, but part of me still wanted to understand how she was justifying this to herself. We sat at the patio table behind the house while Tessa and Noah were out. Dad stayed inside. Mom had made coffee, which was her usual way of pretending a difficult conversation was ordinary. She pushed a mug toward me. I don't want this to become ugly. Neither do I. Then stop treating the house like a business transaction. I looked at her. You asked me to keep paying the mortgage on a house you gave to someone else. You're making that sound worse than it is. How should I make it sound? She folded her hands. Your father and I raised you. We helped you through school. We gave you a place to come home to whenever you needed one. You've done well. You've been able to help us. That's what families do. Then why doesn't what families do include asking me before giving away something I own part of? She looked irritated. Because you don't need the house. There it was again. Need. I leaned back. Would you expect Tessa to put $118,000 into a property and then walk away from it because I needed it more? Mom's eyes narrowed slightly. Tessa's circumstances are different. They're always different. Because they are? She said it with such certainty that I stopped looking for fairness inside the sentence. She has a child. She's rebuilding her life. You have a career. You have savings. You can recover from things she can't. I stared at my coffee. Years earlier, that logic would have worked on me. It had worked when Tessa needed help with a security deposit. It had worked when Mom asked me to cover a family trip because Tessa was going through a rough patch. It had worked every time my parents needed an unexpected repair and knew I would find a way. I had always treated my ability to recover as proof that the sacrifice was small. For the first time, I saw the trick in it. Being able to recover doesn't mean nothing was taken from me, I said. Mom looked away toward the yard. Nobody took anything. I didn't argue. I already knew I wasn't going to win by making her use my words. On my way home, Simone called and asked whether I wanted to meet at the workspace she had been considering for her renovation company. I almost said I was too tired, then changed my mind. The space was small, above a print shop, with uneven floors and 2 windows facing an alley. Simone unlocked the door and spread her arms like she was presenting a penthouse. Imagine it with less dust. I laughed despite myself. 3 years earlier, she and I had talked seriously about starting a design and project management studio together. I would handle planning, budgets, and interiors. She would run the construction side. We had even built a draft business plan. Then my parents needed a new roof. After that came a property tax shortfall. Then Dad had a stretch where his insurance premiums jumped and his business income dipped. None of those things had destroyed my finances. They just kept pushing the studio back 6 months at a time. Simone leaned against the window. Do you still have the old plan? Somewhere. You should look at it. Right now? Especially right now? That night I opened the folder. The numbers embarrassed me, not because the plan was bad, because I could see how close I had been. If I had redirected even half of what I had put into the house over the last 3 years, Simon and I could have launched already. I sat there with my calculator and realized the meaningful loss wasn't just the money sitting inside someone else's walls. It was time. I had postponed something I actually wanted because every family expense arrived labeled urgent and every dream of mine arrived labeled flexible. The next afternoon, Tessa called. Her voice was quieter than Mom's had been. Can we talk without fighting? I'd prefer that. Mom explained the deed thing. Okay. I really didn't know your name was still on it. I believed her. There was enough uncertainty in her voice that I didn't think she was performing. I figured you didn't. She always said you helped with expenses because Dad's business was unstable. She never said you owned part of it. I do. So what happens now? First, the renovations stop until we decide what everyone is doing. She was silent. I already paid a deposit. Then that's something we need to account for. I can't just put Noah through another move. I'm not asking you to move tomorrow. But eventually. Eventually we need an arrangement that respects the people who actually own the house. Her voice tightened. You don't even want to live there? I looked at the old business plan still open on my desk. What does that have to do with it? I'm just saying, you have your apartment, you have your job. You're fine. The word fine landed exactly where Mom's version had. I waited before answering because I didn't want anger to choose the sentence for me. Not wanting to live there doesn't make my share yours. I didn't say it did. You kind of did. I'm trying to keep my son stable. And I'm trying to stop my life from being the thing everyone assumes can wait. Tessa. I could hear a television in the background and Noah laughing at something. For 1 second I felt guilty enough to take everything back. Then I remembered the moving truck and my boxes going down the steps before anyone had even bothered to call me. I'm getting the property valued, I said. Then we can talk about realistic options. Mum's not going to like that. I'm not asking her to like it. After we hung up, I scheduled an independent appraisal for the following week. It was the first decision I made that had a real consequence attached to it. Numbers would force us out of the argument about who needed what more and into a simpler question. What was this house actually worth, and what did my share mean? The day before the appraisal, my phone buzzed while I was in a client meeting. It was a message from Mrs. Keller, the neighbor who had lived across from my parents for 20 years. She had sent a photo with one line underneath, "Thought you knew about this." I opened it. The kitchen windows were visible behind a contractor's dumpster. Inside, half the cabinets were already gone. Tessa hadn't paused the renovation. She had started tearing the kitchen apart. I left the client meeting 20 minutes early and drove straight to my parents' house. By the time I got there, the kitchen looked like someone had stopped halfway through erasing it. 3 upper cabinets were gone. The old backsplash had been stripped from one wall. Plastic sheeting covered the doorway, and a contractor I didn't recognize was standing near the sink with a pry bar in his hand. Tessa was beside him scrolling through pictures on her phone. "Stop," I said. Both of them turned. Tessa's expression changed immediately. "What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing. You told me you understood the renovations needed to wait." I said, "I understood what you were saying." I didn't agree. The contractor looked from her to me. "Is there an issue?" "I'm one of the owners of this property," I said. "There's a dispute over authorization for this renovation, so I'm asking you not to continue until it's resolved." His entire posture changed. "I was told the homeowners approved it." "Not all of them did." Tessa's face went red. "Are you seriously doing this in front of him?" "I'm not the one who started demolition after being asked to wait." The contractor put the pry bar down. To his credit, he didn't take sides. He just said he needed clarification before his crew did anything else. Tessa folded her arms. "I already paid a deposit." "Then why didn't you wait until after the appraisal?" "Because Mom said this was ridiculous and you'd come around." Before I could answer, Mom came through the back door carrying 2 grocery bags. She stopped when she saw me. "What happened?" Tessa answered first. "Marlowe shut down the renovation." Mom set the bags on the counter. "You did what?" "I asked the contractor to pause work on property I co-own until we resolve ownership." "You're humiliating your sister in front of people she hired." "Who's paying for the renovation?" Mom blinked. "What? Who is paying for it?" Tessa stepped forward. "I paid the deposit from my divorce settlement. And the rest." She looked at Mom. That look was enough. I turned to her. "Mom, we were going to figure it out." "Meaning?" "Meaning Tessa has some money, your father, and I can contribute. And once you calm down, I assumed you'd help with part of it." I actually looked around the half-demolished kitchen because I needed something neutral to focus on. "You promised my money before asking me." "I didn't promise anything." "You told her I would come around." "Because normally you do." She said it so casually that something inside me became very still. "Normally you do." That was the entire system in 3 words. I took my phone from my bag. "Fine. Then let's stop doing this informally. I have 3 options." Mom gave me a tired look. "Marlowe. Option 1. You and Tessa buy out my ownership at a fair valuation. Option 2, the financing gets restructured so I'm completely removed from the property and any continuing obligation, with my ownership interest resolved as part of that. Option 3, we sell the house and divide the proceeds according to everyone's legitimate interest. Tessa stared at me. Mom shook her head before I had even finished. No. Which part? All of it. We are not selling this house. Then buy me out. With what money? That sounds like something you should have figured out before giving Tessa the house. Her jaw tightened. This is your family home. Exactly. And apparently being family only matters when you need me to pay for it. Dad came in through the garage while we were still arguing. He took one look at the kitchen and stopped. What happened here? Mom pointed at me as though I had removed the cabinets myself. Marlowe stopped the work. I explained the 3 options again. Dad listened without interrupting. When I finished, he rubbed the back of his neck. Maybe we don't need to decide all this today. You already decided, I said. You decided Tessa gets the house. I'm asking how you plan to make that decision financially possible. Mom shook her head. Everything doesn't need to be reduced to money. It became about money when you asked me to keep making payments. Tessa left the kitchen without another word. Mom followed her a minute later, leaving Dad and me standing beside an exposed wall where cabinets had been that morning. He nodded toward the front door. Walk with me. We went outside. Dad stopped near my car and put his hands in his pockets. Your mother is under a lot of pressure. So is Tessa, I know. She's worried about Noah. I know that too. Then maybe give this some time. I looked at him. How much? A year. I thought I had measured him. A year? Keep things basically the way they are. Let your mother settle down. Let Tessa get stable. We'll work something out. You want me to keep paying for another year while Tessa lives there and renovates the house. Not everything. Just help the way you have been. Dad, I've already put over $100,000 into that property. He looked uncomfortable. I know you've helped a lot. No, I don't think you do. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder containing the old studio proposal. I had brought it because Simon and I were meeting later. Do you remember this? He glanced at the cover. The design business. The one I've been talking about opening for years. Sure. I could have done it already. He didn't say anything. Every time I got close, something came up at the house, the roof, taxes, the furnace. Dad, if I keep everything the way it is for another year, what happens to this? He looked at the folder, then at me, and gave the answer I think he genuinely believed was reassuring. You can always do that later. I didn't respond immediately. There was no cruelty in his face. That was what made the sentence land so cleanly. He wasn't trying to hurt me, he simply believed it. Tessa needed stability now. Mom needed peace now. The house needed money now. My life could happen later because I was good at waiting. I slid the folder back into my bag. No. Dad frowned. No what? I can't do another year. Marlowe? I'm 34. How many more years of my life are supposed to be later? He looked toward the house. I'm just asking you not to make a permanent decision while everybody's emotional. You already made a permanent decision without me. I got into my car before the conversation could circle back to Tessa's divorce or Noah's stability or Mom's stress. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger would have been easier. What I felt was the strange quiet that comes when something you've been trying not to understand finally becomes obvious. That evening, I sat with Simone in her dusty little workspace and told her everything. Part of me wants to cancel every payment and let them deal with it. I admitted. Don't, she said. Not because they deserve protection. Because you do. She was right. I didn't want revenge that damaged my own credit or reduced the value of an asset I partly owned. So we treated it like a project. I wrote down every continuing expense. I separated legal obligations from voluntary support. I wrote the 3 resolution options in plain language and gave my parents and Tessa a deadline to respond. Then I did something that felt almost embarrassingly small. I opened a separate account for the studio and transferred into it the money I would normally have kept available for the next family emergency. For once, I assigned my own future a budget before somebody else could spend it. I emailed the proposal at 80:14 that night. Mom didn't respond. Dad didn't respond. Tessa didn't respond, but by 10:00, my cousin Rebecca had texted me. "Is it true you're trying to force Tessa and Noah out of their home?" 10 minutes later, then aunt messaged. Then another cousin. By midnight, I understood Mom's answer. She wasn't going to discuss my 3 options yet. She was going to make me feel guilty enough to withdraw them. By the next morning, 6 relatives had contacted me about a version of the story I barely recognized. According to my Aunt Diane, I was forcing a newly divorced mother and her little boy onto the street. According to my cousin Rebecca, Mom was heartbroken that money had become more important to me than family. Nobody mentioned that I co-owned the house. Nobody mentioned the mortgage payments, the repairs, or the 3 options I had offered. And nobody mentioned that Tessa had somewhere else to live before Mom invited her to move in permanently. I sat at my desk before work with my phone buzzing beside my coffee and started typing a long response to Rebecca. I explained the refinance. I explained the deed. I almost attached the spreadsheet showing the $118,000 I had contributed. Then I stopped. I could already see what would happen. I would spend the next week presenting evidence to people who had no role in the decision, while Mom would turn every explanation into proof that I was cold and transactional. So I deleted the paragraph and wrote one sentence instead. The property is jointly owned, and I'm asking for a fair legal and financial resolution before anyone treats it as belonging to one person. Rebecca replied with 3 dots, then nothing. I used the same sentence with everyone else. Aunt Diane sent me a thumbs up that somehow felt disapproving. Another cousin never answered. It bothered me more than I wanted to admit, but something changed when I stopped defending myself. Mom could tell people whatever she wanted. Their opinions did not change the names on the deed, the balance on the mortgage, or the fact that she had promised Tessa something she could not give her without my cooperation. I spent that evening finishing the expense breakdown I had started after talking to Dad. This time I made it painfully specific: mortgage, property tax, insurance, utilities, landscaping, routine maintenance, repairs, Tessa's proposed renovation. I separated everything into 3 columns: expenses necessary to protect the property, expenses tied to living in the property, and optional improvements. Then I emailed the document to Mom, Dad, and Tessa. I explained that I would continue meeting the obligations necessary to protect my ownership and financial standing while we worked toward a resolution. I would not pay Tessa's utilities. I would not finance her renovation. I would not cover landscaping or household services for people living there. And I would not provide additional cash for expenses created by a decision I had been excluded from making. Mom replied 11 minutes later. "Families don't send each other spreadsheets, Marlowe." I stared at the message and almost laughed. Families apparently could give away jointly owned houses without meetings, but spreadsheets were where she drew the line. I typed back, "Then choose one of the 3 options, and we won't need the spreadsheet for long." She didn't respond. The first real consequence showed up about a week later. Tessa called me at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening. "Did you seriously remove your payment from the electric account?" "The extra payment?" "Yes. It's almost $300. You and Noah are living there full time now. Mom and Dad are still here. Then the 3 of you can decide how to split it. You always paid part of it." I paid part of it. When Mom and Dad lived there, and I believed I was helping maintain a property we all had an understanding about. "So now you're keeping score." I looked around my apartment. On my dining table were sample boards for a restaurant project I had been working on all week. Beside them was the old studio plan Simon and I had started updating. "No, I'm changing what I agree to pay for," Tessa exhaled sharply. The contractor also wants the next payment. Then pay him. You know I can't cover all of that right now. I didn't hire him. It's your house too, according to you. Exactly. Which is why I told you not to start the renovation. Silence. Then she said, "You're being unbelievably heartless." A month earlier, that word would have worked. I would have started explaining myself, probably offered to cover part of the bill, and spent the rest of the night angry that I had done it. Instead I said, "If you're calling it your house, when we talk about who gets to live there, then you can't call it my house only when a bill arrives." She hung up. I put the phone down and noticed something strange. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't rehearsing the conversation in my head. I went back to arranging the sample boards. 2 days later, Simone texted me an address and told me to meet her after work. It was the little second floor space above the print shop we had looked at before, except this time she had numbers. Rent, insurance, utilities, basic furniture, deposit. We sat cross-legged on the dusty floor with her laptop between us. "We don't need the perfect studio," she said. "We need a place to start." I looked around. The walls needed paint. One window stuck halfway open. The bathroom door made a noise, like it was protesting every time someone touched it. It was nothing like the polished space I had imagined 3 years earlier. That was probably why I liked it. Month to month, I asked. For the first 6 months. And we split the deposit. 50-50. I opened my banking app. The money I had moved into the studio account after my conversation with Dad was sitting there untouched. My first instinct was still to hesitate. What if Mom called next week because the house needed something expensive? What if Dad's business slowed down again? What if Tessa couldn't make rent or cover some emergency for Noah? Then I realized I was once again budgeting for disasters that had not happened before budgeting for the life directly in front of me. "Send me the lease," I said. Simone smiled. "That's a yes. That's a yes." Signing for that ugly little workspace felt more rebellious than anything I had done with the house. I wasn't taking something from my family. I was simply spending some of my own money before they could need it. Mom called the following Sunday with what she called a compromise. Her voice was softer than it had been since the moving truck. "I've been thinking about what you said. Okay, maybe we don't need to make a permanent decision immediately." I waited. "You could continue the mortgage arrangement for now," she said. "And once Tessa is more established, she could reimburse you." There it was. The same arrangement with a new label. How much would she reimburse me? "We haven't gotten that far. When would payments start?" "Marlowe, we're trying to meet you halfway. Is there a written repayment schedule?" Her patience thinned. "Why does everything have to be written?" "Because your current plan is that I keep paying and hope somebody pays me back someday. Your sister needs time." "Then take the time. But not on my money." Mom was quiet. "You really don't trust us anymore." That one hurt because part of me still wanted to reassure her. Instead I answered the actual question. "Not with this house." She ended the call soon after. That evening Dad called from his truck. He sounded tired. "Your mother thinks you're going to cool off eventually." "I'm not angry, Dad. You know what I mean?" "What does she think happens?" He hesitated. "She thinks you won't actually force a sale." I looked across the room at the signed lease for the studio sitting on my desk. "Do you believe that too?" Dad didn't answer. For years, my family had mistaken my patience for agreement. Now they were about to find out what happened when I stopped waiting for permission to choose my own future. Dad's silence answered my question better than anything he could have said. He believed what Mom believed. I might be upset, I might send spreadsheets and cancel a few payments. I might even talk about selling the house, but eventually I would decide keeping the peace was easier than following through. That assumption had protected my family from consequences for years. 2 weeks later, Mom invited me to what she called a family mediation. I almost laughed when she used the word. There was no mediator. It was just Mom, Dad, Tessa, and me around the dining table where we had eaten Thanksgiving dinner since I was 12. Still, I agreed to go because I had one condition. We're discussing the 3 options I sent. I told her. Not whether I'm allowed to have an ownership interest. Fine, she said. When I arrived, Tessa had printed several pages of rental listings and placed them beside her chair. Mom had a notebook, Dad had coffee, and the expression of a man who already wished he were somewhere else. Mom began before I had even taken off my jacket. I want everyone to remember that this isn't just about numbers. This house has been in our family for 23 years. I remember, I said. No knows this as his grandparents' home. Tessa needs consistency after everything that happened with the divorce. Your father and I are getting older. Selling affects all of us. I agree. Mom seemed surprised. You do? Yes. That's why I gave everyone 3 options instead of demanding one outcome. I put a copy of the proposal on the table. Which one are we discussing? She looked at it but didn't touch it. I think there's another solution. Of course there was. What is it? You transfer your interest back to your father and me, and we recognize what you've contributed. Recognize how? We can work that out. And the mortgage. You could continue helping temporarily until Tessa is fully established. I waited because I genuinely thought there had to be another part. There wasn't. So your 4th option is that I give up my ownership and keep paying. Mom frowned. When you say it like that, you make it sound absurd. How else would you say it? As helping your family transition. I looked at Dad. He stared into his coffee. Tessa finally spoke. I have an idea. She slid a piece of paper toward me. There was a number written on it. It was less than half of even the conservative value I had estimated for my share. What is this? What I could probably manage if Mom and Dad helped. For my ownership. You've already gotten something out of the house too. What? You've stayed here. You stored things here. You had family dinners here. It's not like you paid all that money and got nothing. For a second, I didn't know how to respond. Then I realized Tessa was serious. You lived here too. That's different. Why? Because I didn't have the kind of income you had. There it was again. Different words, same equation. The more I had, the less anything I contributed seemed to belong to me. I pushed the paper back. No? Tessa stared at me. You didn't even think about it. I did. The answer is no. So you'd rather sell to strangers. I'd rather resolve the ownership fairly. Mom dropped her pen onto the table. This is exactly what I mean. You're treating us like business partners. No. If you were business partners, none of you would have tried to give away jointly owned property without asking me. Nobody had much to say after that. I left feeling more certain than when I arrived. Then the appraisal came back 3 days later and reminded me that being right did not mean everything would be easy. The number was lower than I expected. Not disastrously low, but enough to matter. I called the appraiser and asked why. He walked me through comparable sales, condition, timing, and then the kitchen. A functional but dated kitchen was one thing. A partially demolished kitchen was another. Buyers saw uncertainty. Finishing it could improve marketability. Leaving it torn apart would likely reduce offers. I sat in my office staring at the report. If I pushed for an immediate sale, I could recover less. Because Tessa had started a renovation, I had specifically asked her to pause. If I paid to finish it myself, I would be doing exactly what I had sworn to stop doing, spending more money to fix a decision someone else made. Mom apparently heard about the appraisal from Tessa because that evening she texted me. This is why selling makes no sense. I didn't respond. For the first time since finding the deed, I wasn't sure what the smartest move was. I could force the issue quickly and accept a weaker result. Or I could wait and risk giving Mom more time to turn temporary delay into permanent surrender. The next morning, Simone found me staring at the appraisal over coffee in our half-furnished studio. You look like that report insulted your mother, she said. My mother would probably like this report. I explained the problem. Simon read the kitchen section. You're thinking about this like there are only two choices. Sell now or finish the renovation. No, sell now or finish their renovation. Those aren't the only choices. She pulled a legal pad toward her. What does the house actually need to be functional again? We went through it as a project, not as a family fight. The expensive cabinets Tessa wanted weren't necessary. Neither was the island or new flooring throughout the first floor. The kitchen needed the damaged areas repaired, basic cabinets replaced where demolition had already happened, and the walls made presentable. Restore function. Stop there, then get it reappraised, Simone said. You protect the value without buying Tessa her dream kitchen. It was so obvious once she said it that I felt annoyed I hadn't seen it myself. That afternoon I sent another proposal, essential restoration only, no cosmetic upgrade, costs divided rather than dumped on me. Mom rejected it almost immediately. Tessa said she had already spent enough on the deposit. Then Dad surprised everyone. He called me privately and said, I'll cover part of it. From where? My retirement savings. Dad, I'm not asking you to drain your retirement. I'm not draining it. I can cover my share. That phrase, my share, was new. Why now? He was quiet for a moment. Because you're right about one thing. We keep asking you because it's easier. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or angry that it had taken this long. Mom won't like that. No, he said. She won't. A few days later, Dad asked me to meet him at a diner near his old workshop. He arrived carrying a battered, spiral notebook held together with a rubber band. Your mother used to keep track of house expenses in this, he said, before she started doing everything on the computer. I looked at him. Why are you giving it to me? I think you should see something. I opened it expecting old utility totals and repair estimates. That was mostly what it contained. Furnace service, taxes, plumbing, roof deductible. Besides some entries were initials showing who paid. G for Dad, E for Mom, M for me. Then I noticed notes written in Mom's handwriting. Roof balance, ask Marlowe. She can afford it. Tax shortfall, Marlowe can cover. Furnace, talk to Marlowe first. She can afford it. It wasn't evidence of fraud. It wasn't even a secret plan. Somehow that made it hurt more. My mother had turned my financial stability into a household category. I looked up at Dad. How long did you know she thought like this? Marlowe, she didn't mean it the way it looks. How does it look? Like she was using you? Wasn't she? He rubbed both hands over his face. We knew you'd be okay. I closed the notebook. How many times did you let that sentence decide for me? Dad looked down at the table. This time, I didn't need him to answer. I took Mom's notebook home and left it on my dining table for 2 days before opening it again. I didn't need to study every page. There was no hidden account, no forged signature, no secret transfer waiting to turn the whole thing into something simpler. The entries were ordinary. Property tax, roof repair, furnace service, insurance increase, plumbing. The kind of expenses every house produces eventually. What changed the way I saw them were the notes beside my name. Marlowe can cover it. Ask Marlowe first. She can afford it. I had spent weeks trying to decide whether Mom understood how unfair the house situation was. The notebook finally made that question feel irrelevant. Maybe she had never sat down and deliberately decided to use me. Maybe she genuinely believed that because I earned more, asking me was the practical choice. But intentions didn't change the pattern. Every time the family had a problem, my ability to solve it became permission to assign it to me. Dad called the next evening. Did you look through it? Enough. Your mother doesn't know I showed you. I'm not going to confront her with it. He sounded surprised. You're not. What would that accomplish? She'd tell me I'm interpreting it wrong. Then we'd spend 2 hours arguing about what she meant instead of what happened. Dad was quiet. I should have said something years ago. I walked to the window. Across the street, Somebody was carrying groceries into their apartment while a little girl held the door open with both hands. Normal life. Normal responsibilities. Why didn't you? Because saying no to your mother usually turned into an argument. Asking you was easier. It was probably the most honest thing Dad had said since this started. You know what that means, right? I think I do. Avoiding the conflict didn't make it disappear. You just assigned the cost of it to me. I know. I didn't tell him everything was okay. It wasn't. But I also didn't need him to defend himself anymore. Then do something different next time. A week later, the essential kitchen work was finished. Not Tessa's dream renovation. No custom island. No expensive fixtures. The damaged sections were repaired. Basic cabinets were installed where the old ones had been removed, and the kitchen was functional again. Dad paid his agreed share. Tessa reluctantly contributed part of hers from the remaining divorce settlement. I paid only the portion tied to protecting my ownership interest. Mom complained about the arrangement from beginning to end. But for once, complaining didn't change the numbers. The second appraisal came back stronger. Not some miraculous jump in value. Just enough to put us back where we probably would have been if the kitchen had never been torn apart. I printed the report, updated the 3 options, and asked everyone to meet at the house one final time. Mom sat at the dining table with her arms crossed. Tessa looked exhausted. Dad sat beside her rather than beside Mom, which I noticed immediately. I placed copies of the appraisal in front of them. I'm giving Tessa the first opportunity to buy out my interest, I said. Mom's expression softened slightly, as though she thought I was finally surrendering. There's a deadline. If financing can't be arranged by then, I want us to move forward with a sale. Her expression hardened again. Tessa looked at the number. That's more than we talked about. Because the earlier number wasn't based on fair value. Mom tapped the page. You could reduce your share. I could. I'm choosing not to. Even for your sister. Especially after everything that happened. I want the arrangement to be clear and fair. Tessa stared at the appraisal for a long time. If I can get financing, you'll sign. If the financing actually resolves my ownership and removes the obligations we discussed. Yes. And you won't change your mind? No? She nodded slowly. That mattered to me. I wanted her to have a real chance. If she could afford the house, I had no interest in taking it from her. What I would not do was pretend giving up my equity was the price of being a decent sister. Tessa applied for financing. For almost 2 weeks, nobody talked much. I focused on work and the studio. Simon and I had landed our first small independent project together, a dental office renovation that wasn't glamorous but was ours. I was reviewing flooring samples when Tessa called. They won't approve enough. Her voice sounded flat. I'm sorry. I can qualify for part of it, not the whole buyout. I waited. What if you took less? She asked. How much less? She named a number. It was still far below what my share was worth. I can't do that. Can't or won't? Won't. She exhaled. You'd still walk away with plenty. There it was one more time. The argument that had followed me through this entire mess. Enough. Fine. Stable. Words people used when they wanted to decide what I could afford to lose. That isn't how ownership works, Tessa. I have no to think about. I know. You don't need that money the way I need this house. I closed the flooring catalogue in front of me. And that still doesn't make my share yours. She hung up soon after. Mom demanded another meeting the following day. We stood in the restored kitchen, because Tessa had already packed most of the dining room. Mom didn't bother pretending this was a discussion. You are really going to sell this house to strangers because your sister can't meet some number on a piece of paper? The number is based on the value of the house. She is your sister. I know who she is. Then act like it. Dad shifted beside the counter. Tessa stayed near the doorway, silent. Mom continued. You have a career. You have savings. You're starting a business. Tessa is trying to rebuild her life. You would rather strangers live here than let your sister have a home. For once, I didn't feel the need to explain everything that sentence left out. I didn't mention the 118,000. I didn't mention the notebook. I didn't mention the years I had delayed the studio. I just looked at her and said, I'm willing to let Tessa buy a home. I'm not willing to buy it for her. Mom stared at me. Nobody asked you to buy it for her. That is exactly what you've been asking me to do. You promised her the house because you assumed I would keep paying, give up part of what I owned, or both. That is not what happened. Then how was your plan supposed to work? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I turned to Dad. If Tessa can't complete the buyout, are you willing to proceed with the sale? Mom looked at him immediately. For most of my life, that look would have been enough. Dad would have asked for more time. He would have found some middle ground that usually meant I gave something up. This time he looked at the appraisal, then at me. Yais? Mom's head snapped toward him. Grant. We gave Tessa something we didn't fully own, he said quietly. We shouldn't have done that. You're taking her side. I'm saying we can't keep asking Marlowe to carry this. The room went completely still. That was the moment the balance changed. Not when I found the deed. Not when I stopped the extra payments. Not even when the appraisal came back. It changed when Mom realized she could no longer make a decision and count on everyone else to absorb the consequences. Tessa looked down at the floor. She didn't defend Mom. Within 3 weeks, we received an outside offer. It wasn't spectacular. Nobody was suddenly rich, but it was fair, and after the remaining mortgage and selling costs, there would be enough equity to resolve everyone's interest cleanly. I reviewed the numbers carefully. I confirmed that the sale would end my continuing financial obligations to the property. Then I signed. Mom refused to discuss the closing with me. Dad accepted it. Tessa became strangely quiet. The night before we were scheduled to finalize everything, my phone rang. It was Tessa. Can we meet tomorrow morning before closing? She asked. I hesitated. What for? There was a pause. Because there's something I should have told you before any of this got this far. Tessa chose a coffee shop halfway between my apartment and the house. When I arrived, she was already sitting in the back corner with both hands wrapped around a cup. She didn't seem to be drinking. For the first time since this started, she didn't look angry. She looked tired. I sat across from her. What did you want to tell me? She stared at the table for a few seconds. Mom really didn't tell me your name was on the deed when she first offered me the house. I know. But after you told me, I knew things weren't as simple as she made them sound. I waited. Tessa rubbed her thumb along the edge of the cup. And I kept going anyway. That was not what I expected. Why? She gave a short, embarrassed laugh. Because I wanted it. At least the answer was honest. After the divorce, I felt like everything in my life had become temporary. The apartment, money, plans, even weekends with no depended on schedules and paperwork. Then Mom said the house would be mine, and for the first time in months I felt like I had won something. Won. That's the part I'm not proud of. She finally looked at me. You were always the one who had everything together. Good job. Savings. Your own place. Mom talked about you like you were proof that everything would work out. And every time she talked about me, there was some problem she was trying to fix. I had never thought of it that way. Being the responsible daughter had never felt like winning from my side. So the house felt like something I had that you didn't, she continued. Then when you said you owned part of it, I knew it wasn't fair. I just kept telling myself you didn't need it. I said nothing. She swallowed. I made needing more feel the same as deserving more. That sentence did more than any apology could have. It didn't erase what she had done. It didn't restore the money or the months we had spent fighting. But it was the first time anyone in my family had described the problem without making my ability to survive it part of the justification. I appreciate you saying that, I told her. I don't know what happens with us after today. I know. I'm not ready to pretend everything is fine. I'm not asking you to. She looked down again. I'm going to figure out the housing situation myself. I told Mom to stop calling people about it. We sat there for another few minutes talking about Noah, her new rental search, and nothing important enough to become another argument. Then we left separately. Closing happened that afternoon. Mom came, but she barely spoke to me. Dad looked exhausted. Tessa signed what she needed to sign and gave me a small nod across the table. There was no dramatic final confrontation. No one begged me to stop. No one suddenly became a different person because paperwork had reached its final page. We signed, the sale went through, the remaining mortgage was cleared, and the proceeds were distributed according to the ownership arrangement and closing obligations. After almost 7 years of helping support that house, my financial connection to it was over. I sat in my car afterward and checked my account when the transfer notification arrived. For a few seconds, I had the strange urge to call Mom and ask whether she needed anything. The impulse was so automatic that I almost laughed. Instead, I called Simon. It's done. How do you feel? I looked back at the building where we had signed everything. Lighter than I expected. I didn't pour all of my share into the studio. The old version of me probably would have. I had spent so much of my adult life proving commitment, by giving more than was necessary, that over-investing in my own business would have been the same habit wearing better clothes. Simon and I created a budget. I put a defined amount into equipment, software, furniture, and operating expenses. The rest stayed in savings. Our studio still had uneven floors. The bathroom door still complained, but within a few months, we had several projects running at once. And for the first time in years, when money came into my account, I didn't automatically calculate how much of it might be needed somewhere else. Mom and Dad moved into a smaller condo. It wasn't luxurious, but they could afford it without depending on me. Dad started handling more of their finances himself. We talked occasionally. Our relationship didn't magically return to what it had been. But something about him changed after the house sold. He stopped calling me to solve arguments between Mom and Tessa. He stopped beginning conversations with, "We have a little problem." Sometimes he just called to ask how the studio was doing. Tessa found a townhouse near Noah's school. It was smaller than the house and more expensive than she wanted. A few months later, she told Dad she had taken on additional work to make the budget easier. I heard about it from him, not from her. That mattered too. She wasn't asking me to fix it. She was adjusting her own life. Mom took the longest. She rarely mentioned the house, and she never apologized for promising it to Tessa. I eventually accepted that she might always believe she had been trying to do the right thing. Closure, I learned, was easier once I stopped requiring her to agree with my version of what happened. About 6 months after the sale, Mom called me while I was working late at the studio. "The air conditioning unit at the condo is having problems," she said. My body reacted before my brain did. I sat straighter. "How much?" The question came out automatically. Mom was quiet. "The technician thinks it may need replacing." I waited for the next sentence. "We were wondering if you could help." I had heard some version of it dozens of times. Mom started, "Why we're wondering if you could." Then she stopped. There was a long silence. "What?" I asked. She exhaled. "Never mind. Your father and I will figure it out." I could have offered. I had the money. That was the important part. I could have helped without missing rent, delaying payroll, or touching my emergency savings. But for the first time, having the ability did not feel like an obligation. "Okay," I said. "Let me know how it goes." A week later, Dad told me they had replaced the unit using money from their home maintenance fund. The world had not ended. Nobody had been abandoned. A problem had appeared, and the people responsible for it had solved it. Months later, I happened to drive through my parents' old neighborhood after visiting a client. I almost passed the street without thinking, then turned down it. The house looked different. The new owners had painted the trim and replaced the front door with a dark wooden one. There were bicycles beside the garage and a basketball near the driveway. I pulled over across the street for maybe 30 seconds. I expected to feel something dramatic: anger, nostalgia, regret. Instead, I felt relief. For years, I had thought that house represented everything I had done for my family. Every payment, every time I postponed something because they needed me. But the money had never been the most expensive part. The real cost was becoming so dependable that everyone, including me, stopped asking whether I wanted to keep paying it. My name on the deed had given me leverage, but that wasn't what changed my life. The change happened when I finally understood that being capable of carrying everyone else didn't mean I had to. The deed proved I owned part of the house. Walking away proved I finally owned my future. And sometimes I still wonder how many families confuse the person who can always handle more with the person who should always have to.